अब मैंने गुजारिश करनी है जनाब डॉक्टर सैयद अकमल हुसैन साहब से कि वो पाकिस्तान और भारत के दरमियान तिजारत के जो मौक़े हैं और इसका मुस्तक़बिल है उसके हवाले से बात करें।
थैंक यू इम्तियाज़ आलम साहब, खालिद अहमद साहब, खुर्शीद कसूरी साहब, ladies and gentlemen. What I hope to do in this very brief discussion is to first locate the present moment in the context of a dramatic historical change that is taking place in this region. To then look specifically at the India-Pakistan trade issue and to try to put at rest a number of misconceptions that have arisen with respect to the dangers of free trade between India and Pakistan, and try to bring to bear the latest research on the subject to show that these fears are located more in ideology than in economic analysis. And to in fact show the great possibilities of overcoming some of Pakistan's economic problems through opening up with India. And to third, look at an issue which has not yet caught the imagination of the press, and that is the severe crisis that this whole region is getting into as the result of global warming. And therefore, the imperative of cooperation is not only in terms of improving the welfare of their people, but the imperative of cooperation is a matter of survival itself. And I'll very quickly indicate the kinds of dangers that lie in store if we don't get together and cooperate in order to survive. First, the historic moment. I think it is now evident, but was not so evident 6 years ago when I first raised this point, which is that there is a seismic change taking place in the global economy, whereby for the first time in the last 300 years, the center of gravity of the global economy is shifting from the West to Asia. At the trends of growth that were prevalent 6 years ago when I raised this point, and in fact they've now been reinforced, the trends of growth with respect to China, the United States, and India very clearly show that over the next 25 years, China will emerge as the world's largest economy. And India will emerge as the world's third largest economy after the United States. But if we are able to implement SAFTA and achieve an integrated South Asian economy, then in fact South Asia will become the second largest economy in the world. If this happens, what we're really talking about is that South Asia and China will together constitute the greatest economic powerhouse in human history. ये मैं आपको अर्ज कर दूं कि एक बहुत गहरा बुनियादी एक तब्दीली आ रही है सेंटर ऑफ ग्रेविटी दुनिया की इकोनॉमी की, मगरब से शिफ्ट हो रही है पहली दफ़ा 300 साल में इस इलाके की तरफ. और अगर चाइना, यूनाइटेड स्टेट्स और इंडिया के ग्रोथ रेट्स की ट्रेंड वही रहे जो इस वक्त हैं, बल्कि वो ज़्यादा इंटेंसिफाई हो गए हैं वो ट्रेंड्स जो कि मैंने इंडिकेट किए थे साफमा की पार्लियामेंटेरियंस कॉन्फ्रेंस में बुरबन में, वो ये है कि अगले 25 साल में इंडिया चाइना दुनिया की सबसे बड़ी इकॉनमी बन जाएगी और इंडिया तीसरी सबसे बड़ी इकॉनमी होगी यूनाइटेड स्टेट्स के बाद. मगर अगर साफ्टा इम्प्लीमेंट हो जाता है और एक इकोनॉमिक इंटीग्रेशन हो जाती है इस इलाके की, जो कि लॉजिकल भी है और उसका इम्पेरेटिव भी है, तो फिर जनूबी एशिया जो है वो दुनिया की दूसरी सबसे बड़ी मईशत बन जाएगी. जिसका मतलब ये हुआ कि अगले 25 साल में ये जो हमारा इलाका है साउथ एशिया का और उसके ऊपर चाइना, ये दुनिया का सबसे पावरफुल एक इकोनॉमिक पावर हाउस जो तारीख में पहली दफ़ा इतना पावरफुल पावर हाउस बनेगा, वो अचीव हो सकता है। जिसका मतलब ये है कि सडनली in a relatively short period of time, this region is going to be catapulted into a position of global leadership. And we need to start thinking about that right now and get out of the paradigm of pettiness, of hostility, of brutality, of violence, and adopt the paradigm of cooperation to build a better world and address the challenges that confront the world in general and South Asia in particular. इसके ऊपर और भी हैं ज़रूरी बातें जो पैराडाइम शिफ्ट जिसकी ज़रूरत है अगर वाकई इस एरिया ने दुनिया की लीडरशिप लेनी है अपने हाथ में, वो मैंने एक पेपर में डिस्कस किया जो रिसेंटली पब्लिश हुआ है। उसका रेफरेंस मेरे वेबसाइट पे अवेलेबल है, मगर मैं अब दूसरा पॉइंट के ऊपर जाना चाहता हूँ, और वो ये है कि गेन्स फ्रॉम ट्रेड का जो इशू एक खड़ा हुआ है इस वक्त, बावजूद इसके कि इंडिया ने भी MFN स्टेटस दे दिया है, पाकिस्तान ने भी ऑन पेपर MFN स्टेटस दे दिया है, और दोनों मुल्क ये चाहते हैं कि जी ट्रेड हो, मगर बहुत से मीडिया के अंदर जो हमारे दोस्त हैं उनको कुछ खदशात हैं इस मामले में, तो वो मैं ज़रा दूर करना चाह रहा था। दी अवेलेबल एविडेंस as far as economic research is concerned over the last 100 years, पिछले 100 साल की जो तहकीक है इकोनॉमिक्स की, वो ये बताती है कि जब दो मुल्क आपस में ट्रेड करते हैं तो दोनों मुल्क गेन करते हैं। If two countries who were not trading before begin to trade, both gain. That is an axiom which we teach our children, क्लासों में पढ़ाते हैं, and you can prove it mathematically उसमें, and there's a huge amount of evidence over the last 1 century to prove this fact. So इस इशू के ऊपर ये कहना कि जी पाकिस्तान को आगे तबाह हो जाएगा, ये कोई it is not neither logical nor it is empirically founded. But the second interesting aspect of recent research, ये ज़्यादा recent है, 100 साल पुरानी नहीं है, is even more interesting, and that says that when a small country begins to trade with a big country, the small country gains relatively more than the big country. Hence, the observation, perceptive observation, which Khurshid Kusuri Sahib made with respect to the Southeast Asian region is perfectly valid, and it is according to the available analytical framework in economics, that the small country gains more than the big country. That is why the smaller countries of even Western, the former Western Soviet Union, like Georgia and so on, and want to join the European Union. Because the available evidence is overwhelming, which is when a small country begins to open up and trade with a big country, the small country in fact gains relatively greater in terms of this percentage of GDP. Okay, now what is the precise sense in which Pakistan will gain relatively more? ये भी देखने की ज़रूरत है कि भी अगर ट्रेड खुल जाती है तो वो स्पेसिफिकली वो क्या चीज़ें हैं जिससे कि हम ये जज कर सकते हैं कि पाकिस्तान को फ़ायदा ज़्यादा होगा। अच्छा, now at the moment there are two strategic problems that confront the economy and endanger the livelihoods and future of the people of our country. And they are that we are locked in a deep recession, number one, and number two, very high rates of inflation, including food inflation. Food inflation, in fact, is higher than the average inflation rate. So ये आप बात मानेंगे कि ये दो बड़े बुनियादी मसाइल पाकिस्तान की मईशत के इस वक्त हैं, जिसके कि बहुत गहरे असरात हो रहे हैं गुर्बत के ऊपर और ये सारी जो टेररिज्म हो रही है उसके ऊपर. Now, when India and Pakistan begin to, as it so happens, I mean, that is an empirical fact, undeniable, that the prices at which industrial raw materials are available from India are a fraction of the price at which they're available from Europe or the United States. Studies have been, look at lathe machines. Lathe machine is a basic machine that's used by all kinds of industry. Lathe machines from India of high quality are available at a fraction of the price that they're available from Europe. Brass, which is an important raw material, a strategic raw material used by Pakistani industry, including ball pens. Indian brass is available at almost 1/7 the price of European brass. So, machines, capital goods, raw materials, and intermediate goods are all available from India for Pakistani industry at a substantially lower price than what they're getting at the moment from the rest of the world. What it means then is that if you open up trade, the first thing that's going to happen to Pakistani industry is that the costs of production are going to fall, which means that other things remaining the same, they will become more competitive than they were before, and might even, some marginal industries might begin to export goods which they were not exporting before. Now, is that a good thing or a bad thing? The second thing that's going to happen is that if you're able to get cheaper machines and industrial raw materials from India, it means that for given levels of investment in money terms, you will be able to generate higher rates of growth. Obvious बात है कि अगर आपकी 1 करोड़ रुपया मुल्क के अंदर इन्वेस्टमेंट 1 अरब रुपया मुल्क में इन्वेस्ट हो रहा है, तो आप इन्वेस्ट होता है जब आप मशीनें खरीदते हैं या रॉ मटेरियल्स खरीदते हैं, और अगर मशीनें और रॉ मटेरियल सस्ते मिलने शुरू हो जाएं तो उसी 1 अरब रुपए के साथ ज़्यादा ग्रोथ जनरेट हो जाएगी. So what we're saying is that opening up with a bigger country like India is going to generate faster growth for Pakistan's economy, and it is going to make its industry, those industries which are able to make use of this trade, more competitive, and indeed can go into exports. The third thing that is going to happen, and again there's a lot of work has been done. There was some time ago the World Bank did a study on this, on food items, and that is that when you are able to trade with India, you are able to reduce the average inflation rate in Pakistan. जाहिर बात है, अगर आप सस्ती चीज़ खरीद लेंगे, ना सिर्फ इंडस्ट्रियल रॉ मटेरियल्स बट कुछ कंज्यूमर गुड्स भी आप सस्ते खरीदेंगे जो मिडिल क्लास इस्तेमाल करती है, तो फिर जाहिर है कि आपकी एवरेज इन्फ्लेशन रेट रिड्यूस हो जाएगी. जब एवरेज इन्फ्लेशन रेट रिड्यूस हो जाएगी तो किसको फ़ायदा, किसकी परचेसिंग पावर बढ़ेगी? मिडिल क्लास की और गरीबों की. So that will not only reduce the inflation rate, it will improve the real distribution of income within the country in favor of the poor and the middle class. Logical. अगर किसी को क्वेश्चन पूछना है तो आप बाद में ज़रूर पूछिएगा, इसको और elaborate मैं कर दूंगा. So trade with India, if you for the moment sort of set aside this paranoia arising out of ideology, if you look at it in hardcore economic terms, then trade with India will mean three things in brief. One, for given levels of investment, we'll be able to generate higher rates of growth. Secondly, our industry will become more efficient, its cost of production will fall, it could go into exports. And so export growth will be accelerated. And number three, the inflation rates will fall in the country, benefiting the relatively poor more than the relatively rich. And therefore, not only the inflation rate will fall, but the real distribution of income will improve. So these are analytical conclusions based on the available evidence. Okay. So but there is another fear, which one of my students raised some time ago in the class, and that was कि जी वो पाकिस्तानी इंडस्ट्री जो है उसको प्रोटेक्ट भी तो करना है ना जी. मतलब है कि ये आप देखें ना, बहुत सी इंडस्ट्री बैठ जाएगी जो कम्पीट नहीं कर सकती इंडिया से. इट्स अ गुड क्वेश्चन. अब इसका आप कैसे जवाब देंगे? बेस्ड अगेन ऑन इकोनॉमिक्स, इमोशन को छोड़ दें. वो ये है कि इफ यू हैव एन इंडस्ट्री, let's say it's producing shoes, and it's inefficient, i.e. its prices are higher than the prices of imported shoes. Forget India, किसी से भी आप import कर रहे हैं. If the prices of shoes within the country are higher than the price of imported shoes, and you ban the import of shoes, or place very high import duties on imported shoes, What it means is that you're placing a tax on the Pakistani consumer because he has to pay a higher price on shoes than he would have to pay if there was free trade. अगर एक पेयर ऑफ शूज़ की कीमत 500 रुपये है दुनिया के अंदर या इंडिया के अंदर, और आप जनाब यहाँ पे अपनी इंडस्ट्री को प्रोटेक्शन देने के चक्कर में 500 रुपये की बजाय 750 रुपये उसका शू की कीमत हो जाती है, तो जो 250 रुपये एक्स्ट्रा दे रहा है पाकिस्तानी कंज्यूमर, वो उसके ऊपर टैक्स लगा रहे हैं ना. इट्स एन आइडियोलॉजी टैक्स, ठीक है ना, इट्स एन आइडियोलॉजी टैक्स. और ऊपर से क्वालिटी भी पुअर उसको मिल रही है. यही चीज़ हो रही है आपकी बहुत से प्रोडक्ट्स की. अब मैं उसमें जाना नहीं चाहता. हमने रिसेंटली BNU में एक सार्क स्टडी की है ऑन द ऑटोमोबाइल इंडस्ट्री. हमने इंटरव्यू किए हैं बच्चों ने हमारे, मैं गया उनके साथ इंटरव्यू करने, ये इंडस्ट्री जो है हमारी ऑटोमोबाइल इंडस्ट्री. तो जनाब उसमें से क्या निकला कि पाकिस्तान ऑटो पार्ट्स इंडस्ट्री, स्पेयर पार्ट्स इंडस्ट्री is stagnating because of a shortage of demand. Some of our units that are producing spare parts for companies like Honda and Toyota, क्योंकि उनकी वो चल ठीक नहीं रही, उनकी इतनी सेलें नहीं हो रही, वो stagnate कर रही है. But their products are so efficient and the quality is so good that they can easily export to India if the trade opens up. And so if the trade opens up, you will have a transformation in the growth prospects of this particular auto spare parts industry. Now, this is merely proving, I mean, this is an empirical study we did, we just finished it, is merely proving a point that was first raised by Paul Krugman in the US, for which he won, of course, the Nobel Prize. And that point, that Krugman's point was a simple point, and this data proves that this across the world, the same holds true. And that is that if you have two countries which are trading, and let's suppose they're producing similar products, so there is no comparative advantage argument for finished products. But often it happens that there can be intra-industry specialization. अगर पूरी इंडस्ट्री की स्पेशलाइजेशन नहीं हो सकती, मतलब ये नहीं हो सकता कि जी पाकिस्तान गाड़ियों के अंदर स्पेशलाइज कर ले और इंडिया बाइसिकल में कर ले, या वाइस वर्सा कि पाकिस्तान बाइसिकल्स में स्पेशलाइज कर ले, इंडिया गाड़ियों में कर ले. अगर ये प्रॉस्पेक्ट नहीं हो सकता, तो फिर ये प्रॉस्पेक्ट ज़रूर हो सकता है कि गाड़ियों के जो स्पेयर पार्ट्स हैं उसके अंदर स्पेशलाइजेशन हो जाए. कुछ स्पेयर पार्ट्स इंडिया बना ले, कुछ पाकिस्तान बना ले, और बोथ कंट्रीज विल गेन. Now the data again shows this. We've sent that study, we've done the study, we've sent it off. So it's very clear. Paul Krugman's point, for which he won a Nobel Prize, was that you can have intra-industry specialization, which constitutes a previously unknown aspect of the gains from trade. Okay. So ये तो issue आ गया India-Pakistan trade का. इसमें इंट्रा-इंडस्ट्री स्पेशलाइजेशन की भी बहुत पॉसिबिलिटीज़ हैं. इसमें इन्फ्लेशन को रिड्यूस करने की पॉसिबिलिटीज़ हैं. इसको आमदन की तकसीम को ज़्यादा मुसावी बनाने की पॉसिबिलिटीज़ हैं. इसमें पाकिस्तान की ग्रोथ को एक्सेलरेट करने की पॉसिबिलिटीज़ हैं. अगर ये सारी पॉसिबिलिटीज़ हैं और इस पर स्टडीज़ हुई हैं और ये प्रूव हो सकता है, तो फिर अगर आपने फिर भी ट्रेड को रोक दिया, तो उसका मतलब ये है कि आपने कोई नॉन रैशनल रीजंस सेलेक्ट कर लिए हैं ट्रेड को बंद करने. बाकी सारी दुनिया ट्रेड आपस में कर रही है, आपने ट्रेड बंद कर दी है. किस वजह से, वो फिर उसको एग्जामिन करना पड़ेगा. अच्छा, आखिर में मैं बात करूंगा, एंड दैट वाज द थर्ड पॉइंट दैट आई वांटेड टू रेज, एंड दैट्स अ वेरी सीरियस पॉइंट. I was so far talking about the advantages of linking up. Now I'm going to talk about the disadvantages of not linking up. The disadvantages of not linking up, right? I'll come to that in the end. We recently held a world conference in which Khalid Ahmed Saab gave a seminal presentation in which we brought some of the finest minds in the region, or some of the finest minds in the world, to focus on the South Asian region. And one of the dimensions which we addressed was the problem of global warming and how it was going to affect South Asia. Dr. Pachauri, who heads the Intergovernmental Panel for Climatic Change, gave a presentation on video. And it was very clear from the cutting-edge new research that's taking place in this particular field. That's a UN body, by the way, the IPCC. No, this was in Delhi. This global warming, it's now known, the major consequence of global warming is that it will increase the frequency and intensity of extreme climatic events. यानी जो extreme events होते हैं climate के साथ related, जिसमें ये बारिशें हैं या drought है या आंधियाँ हैं या ocean tidal waves हैं, ये जो extreme climatic events हैं, इनकी इंटेंसिटी भी बढ़ जाएगी और फ्रीक्वेंसी भी बढ़ जाएगी ग्लोबल वार्मिंग के नतीजे में, जिसका मतलब ये होगा कि, और अब इसके पीछे क्या है, इसके पीछे ये है कि साउथ एशिया का जो इकोलॉजिकल सिस्टम है वो हिमालयाज़ पे और ओशंस पे डिपेंड करता है. नीचे ओशंस हैं, ऊपर हिमालयाज़ हैं. हिमालयाज़ में बर्फ़ें हैं और जो ओशंस हैं उनमें पानी है. जब गर्मी होती है वो पानी कि एवेपोरेट होता है, उससे मानसून आते हैं, और जो ग्लेशियर्स हैं वो गर्मियों में जब मेल्ट करते हैं तो वो पानी देते हैं. तो नाउ द इकोसिस्टम ऑफ साउथ एशिया इज सच दैट इट इज़ पर्टिकुलरली वल्नरेबल टू दिस the effects of global warming, this increased intensity and frequency of extreme climatic events will have a much greater effect on South Asia than any other region of the world. And why is this so? Because the overwhelming majority of the predominant proportion of South Asian population critically depends on agriculture, and well, about 63% if you want a hard figure. But more importantly, or equally importantly, agriculture in turn depends critically on the timing and quantity of rainfall during the monsoons. Now, the first thing that the global warming is going to do is it's going to increase the variability of the monsoons. अगर monsoons की variability with respect to timing and quantity of rainfall बढ़ जाती है, तो इसका मतलब ये है कि यहाँ पे बड़े एक्सट्रीम acute food shortages का खतरा है कई सालों के अंदर. इस फूड शॉर्टेज के खतरे के साथ साथ एक फिनोमेनन हो रहा है कि जो हिमालयन ग्लेशियर्स हैं उनका मेल्ट रेट दुनिया के दूसरे ग्लेशियर्स से, कई ग्लेशियर्स, सारे नहीं, कई ग्लेशियर्स आहिस्ता आहिस्ता मेल्ट कर रहे हैं. जो हिमालयाज़ के जो मीडियम साइज ग्लेशियर्स हैं और छोटे ग्लेशियर्स हैं वो एक्सेलरेटेड पेस पे मेल्ट कर रहे हैं, जो दुनिया का एवरेज मेल्ट रेट से बहुत ज़्यादा है. इसका मतलब ये है जनाब कि फ्लड्स विल कंबाइन विद ड्राउट्स. पहले फ्लड्स आएंगे, उसके बाद ड्राउट्स आएंगी. This which will worsen the variability effect of the monsoons, right? So we're talking about a grave food situation or agricultural production situation in general, right? अब on top of that एक third element आ गया इस global warming का, जो कि डॉक्टर पचौरी ने अपनी रिपोर्ट में लिख दिया, IPCC ने. It's a fairly well known thing which environmentalists know. IPCC की 4 वॉल्यूम की रिपोर्ट निकली है. And by the way, it represents the greatest scientific undertaking in human history. This 4-volume study embodies or represents one of the greatest scientific efforts that human beings have ever undertaken. So, I mean, they're not joking when they say the following thing. And what they're saying is that if the average temperature in South Asia, talking about South Asia here, if the average temperature in South Asia increases by 2.5 degrees centigrade, there will be a 30% reduction, absolute reduction, in the yield per acre of major food grains. The projection now has been revised as far as the increased warming is concerned. Is now expected to be more than 3 degrees centigrade. But even if it was to be 2.5 degrees centigrade, we're talking about a 30% absolute reduction. Growth rate की reduction नहीं है. Absolute reduction in the yields per acre. Now, what we're therefore talking about in the middle of this century, abhi nahi main keh raha, by the middle of this century, we're talking about a huge food deficit relative to the population. And the magnitude of that deficit is going to be such that, first of all, South Asia may not have the foreign exchange to be able to import the food. But even if they were able to have the foreign exchange, such large quantities of food may not be available in the world market. So we're talking about famines here by the middle of this century. Now, we have to, because it's a very serious thing, we have to start addressing the problem now, because the remedial measures themselves are going to take 2 or 3 decades at least. And if we don't undertake those remedial measures now, it'll be too late by the middle of the 20th century. We're talking about a holocaust here by the middle of the 21st century. Now, what are the remedial steps that are to be taken? Those remedial steps essentially involve very close cooperation between India, Pakistan, and the other countries of South Asia in this ecosystem. That includes Nepal, Bangladesh, Maldives, Bhutan, and to some extent Afghanistan. The remedial measures, first of all, are that we have to get together to develop heat-resistant varieties of food grains, seeds that are resistant to heat. They're not available right now. It requires research, and requires research within the region, because this is where the soil is that has to be treated. The second thing is that we have to develop joint watershed management programs. I'll come to that near the end, but we've got to be able to utilize our available water more efficiently in a situation where there is inevitably going to be a water stress over the next 2 or 3 decades. So improved management of irrigation and watersheds is an imperative of survival, and that requires cooperation. And the third thing is that we need to develop technologies and agricultural practices through which, for a given amount of water, we're able to generate greater yields, greater GDP. These are the adaptation or remedial measures. This is quite apart from developing alternative energy systems, etc., which are required, which India is already beginning to do. And by shutting ourselves off from India, we're losing a huge amount in terms of availability of energy. Okay, now one last thing, which is close to the hearts of South Asian governments these days. They're worried about it for a change. They're worried about it because all of us have been writing about it, making a lot of noise, and they're now beginning to get worried. And that is the water problem, water crisis. Very quickly, if you look at good research again has been done, we're putting it into our book. If you look at the Indus Basin, the per capita annual availability of water is about 1,329 cubic meters. That's a fact, measured. 1,329 cubic meters per capita per year is the current availability. And do you know what is the minimum requirement for normal human functioning? It's 1,700 cubic meters per capita per year. So what we're saying is that right now, forget about the middle of the 21st century, right now, Pakistan or the Indus Basin, whoever is using the Indus Basin, is in a water stress situation already. And this water stress is going to get imaginably much worse. It's not unimaginable, it's imaginable, it can be projected. It's going to get much worse once the Himalayan glaciers melt, and if you're not able to store that water and use that water, it's going to get much, much worse. And as the population increases, the per capita availability will obviously go down further. And therefore, ladies and gentlemen, water stress and water problem is something that can really rationally only be addressed through close collaboration and coordination. Time-bound series of actions have to be undertaken by South Asian countries. Unfortunately, history proves that if you don't do that, then you end up in a conflict situation, because water is a very basic resource. It's a means of survival. And there is, Khalid Ahmed Sahib in a poignant and powerful fashion pointed out the dialectic between the upper riparian states and the lower riparian states. I don't want to go into Khalid, you can read Khalid Sahab's paper, which hopefully will be published in the book, is, that the lower riparian state always fears that the upper riparian state is going to stop its water, particularly when there is a water shortage situation. And whether that actually is the case or not, whether it is factually true or not, this fear itself, I think, going beyond Khalid's analysis, I would say that if this fear is there in sufficient magnitude, it can pit one country into a war situation with another country. And this is true not only for countries, but for also provinces within a country. So, for example, Sindh is a lower riparian province compared to Punjab. The two can come into grave conflict. This kind of water, if we don't plan and cooperate to manage the water together. Now, the path before us in terms of the options is clear. We either cooperate at the regional level, South Asian level. We either cooperate and build a better future for our people of material welfare, or we continue to remain mired in conflict and end up either with a catastrophic war or with mass starvation. So the choice is very clear between destruction and building a better future. Building a better future requires economic cooperation as envisaged in SAFTA. And it requires not just trade, which we are hopefully going to begin. It requires actually economic integration. Certain actions at the national level need to be taken in a planned fashion, and a plan has to be built at the regional level. As far as water is concerned, management of large shifts in populations, because when this global warming effects in terms of extreme events happens, you'll have greater disasters, like floods and so on. Large shifts in population are possible, internally displaced populations. They can cross borders. And so we need to learn how to manage such disasters together. And one last thing is that, again, Dr. Pachauri has estimated that the global warming will obviously raise the sea levels along the coast. And of course, the Maldivian case is well known, where Maldives is likely to go underwater near the end of the century, the next 50 years or so. But the point is that along the subcontinental coast, and this includes Karachi, and on the other side, Calcutta, this rising water sea level is likely to displace about almost 500 million people, because the agriculture that is being conducted along the coast, that land is going to get salinized as what sea levels rise. And so they will lose their livelihoods and they will shift inland. We must build an institutional structure through which we can manage large movements of populations. If we don't do that, we will have social conflict and possibly even war. So therefore, the point that I'm trying to make is that at this particular, it's ironic that at this particular juncture in history, when this region is being catapulted into a possible global position of global leadership, into one of the most powerful economies in the world, the second largest economy in the world, at precisely such a juncture, we are faced with a crisis of survival, if you like, with respect to the problems of poverty, inflation, and water shortages and food shortages. The choice, therefore, is very clear. If you want to overcome these strategic disasters of poverty, of inflation, of water shortages, of food shortages, then you've got to cooperate. And in doing so, you will not only be able to survive, but you can build a bright future for the people of your country. If you don't, you will end up remaining mired in poverty, which is, and conflict, which will be massively exacerbated by the impact of global warming. Industries in the sensitive list can be protected. Well, that's quite true. But there are two aspects about the institutional framework of SAFTA, I think, which need to be revised. As far as the sensitive list is concerned, you see a lot of incompetent, inefficient industrialists can enter the sensitive list through the back door, right? And acquire protection when it is against the interests of the country. The old protection argument doesn't hold in a situation, there is an infant industry argument कि जी पहले बच्चे होते हैं, वो बेचारे efficient नहीं होते, उनको protection दे, बच्चे बड़े हो जाएंगे, फिर उनको efficiency बढ़ जाएगी और वो फिर वो उनसे आप protection उतार दें. यहाँ जो बच्चे हैं वो 64 साल हो गए हैं, बचे ही रहे हैं अभी. So, matlab hai, these chaps who, wake up at 11 o'clock in the morning and start playing golf at 12:30 in the club for the rest of the day, and, live off government contracts and rents, they are not going to, regardless of how much protection you give, they're not going to become competitive. And their lack of competitiveness, as I said, places a burden on the poorest sections of society because they're forced to buy poor quality goods at high price. So I would say that we should do what India has done. India, Manmohan Singh in his speech at the recent Saarc summit said we are going to reduce the sensitive list from something like 365 items to only 45 items. Look at the sensitive list very carefully. Only include those items which are of security importance, right? Do not include entrepreneurs who just want to have a great time on the basis of protection. Okay. The other thing is about this non-tariff barriers. Sir, we have raised these issues repeatedly at the, we have this annual South Asia Economic Summit in different parts of the region, and we've raised this point repeatedly about the non-tariff barriers. Now, this is another weakness in the institutional structure of SAFTA itself that needs to be revised. And that is that sure, they've set up a committee to look into non-tariff barriers. But there is no timeline for the meetings. There is no rule with regard to how frequently they should meet. There is no rule with regard to by what deadline they must submit their proposal. And there is no rule with respect to how the proposals, in case they're given, are going to get implemented. And how long it will take for India to implement the proposals of this committee. So all three things that are necessary for any rule to be meaningful don't exist in the case of this rule. This rule neither specifies the frequency of the meetings, nor does it specify the deadline by which they have to put in the proposals, nor does it specify the implementation mechanism of these proposals, and nor does it hold the country, India, to account in case it doesn't implement it, right? So I think this needs to be revised. And once it's revised, there's no reason why, these countries are not irrational countries, they're rational countries, provided the rules are right. They will reduce non-tariff barriers.